I never thought the word low class could sting the way it did that afternoon. 150 people sat under chandeliers and soft jazz when my son's bride turned toward me and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. I froze. My name's David Miller, and for the record, I've been sober for 12 years. In that time, I built a recovery network that now helps thousands of people and brings in over $22 million a year. But none of that mattered in that moment. All people saw was a father in an old suit standing in the wrong corner of a fancy country club. I could feel eyes on me, the air heavy with embarrassment. And I'll admit, part of me wanted to disappear to laugh it off like it didn't matter, but another part of me, the part that had clawed its way out of rock bottom, felt something deeper, something cold, calm, and determined. See, I know shame. I've lived with it, rebuilt myself from it, and helped hundreds of others do the same. So when this young woman, someone who knew nothing about me, decided to use my past as a punchline, I recognized that look in her eyes. It wasn't confidence. It was fear disguised as superiority. She had no idea who she was messing with. That night, when I went home, I couldn't stop replaying it. The whispers, the uncomfortable glances, my son's forced smile. I'd spent years teaching people that recovery isn't weakness, it's proof of strength. And yet here I was being publicly shamed for it. I made a promise to myself, right then. If she wanted to treat me like I didn't belong, I'd show her what real class looks like. Not the kind you buy with money or fake family connections. The kind you earn through honesty, through mistakes, through getting back up when the world expects you to stay down. I didn't know it yet, but that single cruel comment would unravel a web of lies so elaborate that even the FBI would end up knocking on her door. The first time I met Emily, I could tell she had already judged me before I even said a word. Ethan had invited me over for dinner, proud to introduce the woman he thought was his future. I showed up with a bouquet of sunflowers. Maria, my late wife, used to say, "Flowers soften any first impression." But when I offered them, Emily hesitated, her hand pulling back slightly like she was afraid to touch something dirty. "Oh, Ethan didn't tell me you were coming," she said, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I set the flowers on the counter and tried to keep the moment light. "Figured I'd surprise my son," I said. Ethan looked embarrassed, but she didn't notice. She was too busy sizing me up my jeans, my work boots, my shirt that had seen more recovery centers than dinner parties. She asked what I did for a living. When I told her I ran recovery facilities, she gave a small, tight nod and said, "That's important work," with the same tone people use when they're talking about someone collecting cans for recycling. Right then, I knew this girl thought she was above me. Over the next few months, her attitude became impossible to ignore. Whenever I visited Ethan's apartment, she'd disappear into the bedroom with her purse like I might steal from her. When we went out to dinner, she made sure to ask for separate checks. When I mentioned my business, she'd change the subject as if the word recovery was contagious. But what really broke me wasn't her attitude. It was how she changed my son. Ethan used to call every Sunday. We'd talk about his job, his sobriety, the game last night, life in general. After Emily came along, those calls started to fade. When he did pick up, his tone felt careful, like he was choosing every word. One day he said something that stayed with me. "Dad, maybe tone down the recovery stuff around her. It makes her uncomfortable." I remember staring out the window of my office at the New Dawn Recovery Center, watching people on their way to group therapy. Real people fighting real battles. And my son was asking me to hide that part of myself to make his fiancée more comfortable. She just prefers to keep things private, he said. Private. That word stuck with me. There's a difference between private and secretive, and Emily's life was starting to feel like the latter. For 6 months, I'd heard stories about her family in California. Old money, real estate, connections that supposedly stretched across the West Coast. Yet I'd never met them. No photos in her apartment. No holiday visits, no online footprint. Nothing. I tried to look them up, just curiosity, but the search came up empty. Not one real record of the Hartley family empire she loved to mention in passing. And the strangest thing, every time I asked Ethan a question about them, the story shifted. Sometimes her dad was in real estate, other times finance, sometimes both. Her mother ran a charity one week and a boutique the next. It didn't add up. Still, I wanted to believe the best for my son. Love makes you overlook cracks you'd normally see right away. But in recovery, we have a saying, what you ignore will eventually control you. And I couldn't ignore the way this woman's presence was isolating Ethan from everything that kept him grounded. So I kept my distance. I smiled through her subtle jabs and empty compliments, but I started taking mental notes, because something about Emily didn't sit right. The night that changed everything was at Ethan's apartment again. Emily was on the phone, pacing in the kitchen, her voice low but sharp. I wasn't supposed to hear, but the walls were thin. "No, Mom, you don't understand," she said. "His father has a past. Drug issues." "I know, but Ethan's already attached." I froze. The same woman who smiled at me during dinners was now whispering about my past like it was a stain she couldn't wash off. Then came the words that burned themselves into my memory. "At least we won't have to socialize with him much after the wedding. I've made sure he's at table 12 near the service entrance. Table 12, near the door where the staff carried trays of leftovers. I'd spent years rebuilding my life, helping others reclaim theirs, proving to myself that recovery is something to be proud of. Yet in her eyes, I was still someone to hide. That was the moment my suspicion turned into resolve. I didn't know what Emily was hiding, but I knew this, her perfect life, didn't make sense. And if recovery has taught me anything, it's that the truth always finds its way out. You just have to be brave enough to look for it. Some moments change everything, and you don't even realize it until the silence that follows feels heavier than the words themselves. That night, I was helping Ethan move a few things into his new place before the wedding. Emily was in the kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, pacing like someone walking through a minefield. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice carried sharp and irritated. "No, Mom, you don't understand," she said. "His father has a past. With drugs. I know, but Ethan's already attached. What can I do?" I stopped mid-step. The way she said his father made it sound like a burden, like I was some embarrassing footnote she had to explain away. She lowered her voice, but I still caught the next part. "At least we won't have to socialize with him much after the wedding. I've made sure he's at table 12 near the service entrance." Table 12. Near the service entrance. That one line hit me harder than I care to admit. It wasn't just about seating arrangements. It was about what she thought I was worth. She wanted me tucked away out of sight, next to the kitchen door, where the waitstaff carried trays of half-eaten food. I stood there for a long time after she hung up, pretending to sort boxes so they wouldn't notice me. It's strange how something so small, A few careless words can shrink a man who's spent years rebuilding himself. 12 years ago, I'd been sitting in rehab, stripped of everything but hope. Since then, I'd fought for my life, built a business that helped thousands reclaim theirs, and found a sense of peace I never thought possible. But in one phone call, this woman managed to drag me back to that feeling of being less than. When you've been in recovery long enough, you learn to recognize shame, not just your own, but how others try to use it against you. And standing there, I realized something. Emily wasn't just cruel. She was hiding something. People who go out of their way to make others feel small are usually trying to cover a crack in their own facade. That thought wouldn't leave me. Later that night, while Ethan and Emily went out for dinner, I sat in my truck outside their building with my phone in my hand. I typed Hartley Family California Real Estate into Google. Nothing. No business listings, no news articles, no charity events, not even a LinkedIn profile. We live in an age where everyone leaves digital footprints, photos, reviews, comments, something. But this family she'd talked about for months didn't exist. At first, I thought maybe I had the name wrong. I searched again, Hartley Estates, Hartley Development, Hartley Foundation. Still nothing. And then it hit me. If these people were as wealthy and established as she claimed, why were they invisible? I closed my phone and sat there in the quiet, staring at the city lights reflecting off the windshield. I could almost hear my sponsor Jerry's voice from years ago. Michael, the worst thing about addiction isn't the drugs, it's believing you deserve less than respect. Was I really about to sit at table 12 and let someone treat me like I was still that broken man from the past? No, not this time. But I also knew I couldn't just accuse her without proof. Accusations without evidence make you look bitter, not brave. I needed facts, something undeniable. So I decided to start quietly. The next morning, I called an old friend, Dr. Laura Bennett, my business partner at the recovery centers. She had a network of contacts in California from her years in medicine. I told her what I suspected and asked if she could discreetly look into the Hartley family. She didn't ask many questions, just said, "I'll see what I can find." After that call, I sat back in my chair, my coffee growing cold, and thought about Ethan. He was a good man, steady, kind, 5 years sober, the kind of man who sees the best in people even when they don't deserve it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was using that goodness against him. Maybe it wasn't just pride driving me anymore. Maybe it was fear. Not for myself, but for my son. The next few days passed in a haze of polite conversations and forced smiles. Every time Emily mentioned her family, I watched her face. She never slipped, but there was something rehearsed about the way she spoke, like she'd memorized a script. I've spent years talking to people in recovery, reading micro-expressions, learning to tell the truth behind the story. And my gut told me her story wasn't real. Still, I kept my mouth shut, because when you've learned patience the hard way, you know timing is everything. So I waited. Waited for Bennett to call. Waited for something, anything that could turn suspicion into truth. And when that call finally came, it didn't just confirm my worst fears. It revealed something so bizarre, so elaborate, that even I couldn't have made it up if I tried. But that's a story for what came next. The night when table 12 turned out to be the best seat in the house. When you've lived through chaos and come out the other side, your instincts sharpen. You stop ignoring the quiet voice that says something's off. After that night, after hearing Emily's call about table 12, I couldn't silence that voice anymore. The next morning, I called my business partner, Dr. Laura Bennett. She's the kind of woman who never panics no matter how messy things get. Years of working in addiction recovery gave her a calm that only comes from seeing people at their worst and still believing they can change. Laura. I said, I need a favor, quietly. Emily's family, the Hartleys, they don't exist, at least not online. Can you check around, maybe through your contacts in California? They're supposed to be in real estate. She didn't even hesitate. Send me whatever you have, she said. That's what I've always liked about Laura. She doesn't ask why, she just gets it done. Still, I didn't want to rely on one lead. So I made another call to Jack Turner, a private investigator I'd worked with years ago when one of my recovery centers was dealing with internal theft. Jack's rough around the edges ex-military, but sharp as a blade. He has a way of finding truth buried under layers of lies. I told him everything. The strange old money family with no photos, no property, no online presence. The way Emily flinched whenever her past was mentioned. The phone call about my seat near the service entrance. Jack chuckled dryly. Sounds like you've got yourself a classic Con David. I'll dig around, see what surfaces. Give me a few days. The waiting was brutal. I tried to focus on work, running the centers, checking in on patients, but my mind kept drifting back to Ethan. I kept asking myself if I was overreacting, if maybe I was letting old insecurities color my judgment. But every recovery story teaches you the same truth. Denial protects the wrong person. 3 days later, Laura called. Her tone told me everything before she said a word. David, she began. I found something strange. Or rather, I didn't find anything. No Hartley Real Estate Group, no records of family holdings, no professional listings. I asked a friend in property law to search state databases. Nothing. But that's not all. She paused, and my heart started to pound. There's a company called Prestige Acting Solutions in Los Angeles. They handle event performers, background actors, private events, even staged family appearances. One of my contacts says someone recently hired 6 actors through them. The timing lines up perfectly with Emily's wedding plans. I gripped the phone tighter. You're telling me? I'm telling you the Hartley family might not be real, she said quietly. Not just fake people, online literal actors. They're being paid $1,500 a day each. Contracts were filed last month. For a few seconds, I didn't breathe. The world went very still, the kind of stillness that only comes when a lie begins to crumble. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my office staring at the framed photo of Ethan on his graduation day. He looked so proud, so sure of the future. And now that future was tangled in a web of deception so absurd it felt like fiction. Jack called later that night. Your friend's right, he said. The Hartleys are ghosts. Fake addresses, burner phones, and a rental agreement on a mansion in Palm Springs that's been used for photo shoots. I've also traced payments from a company called S. Morrison Financial Services. Guess who's listed as the owner? Emily, I whispered. Bingo. It hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd built an entire fake family. Rented one, really. To convince Ethan she came from money that she was part of some elite world he could never question. Every dinner, every story, every word she'd said about her background had been scripted, and my son believed all of it. I spent the night pacing the living room, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with her, the way she avoided specifics, the subtle power plays, the casual cruelty wrapped in charm. It all made sense now. There's a unique kind of anger that comes when someone manipulates your child. It's not about pride or ego, it's primal. You want to protect them, to rip the mask off the person who's hurting them. But you also know that reacting too soon, too loud, can push them further away. So I decided to wait, to gather everything, to make sure when the truth came out, it wouldn't be just my word against hers. It would be undeniable. That night, as I turned off the lights in my office, I felt the same calm I used to feel before walking into an intervention. You don't rush it. You prepare. You breathe. And when the moment comes, you let the truth speak for itself. Emily wanted me at table 12, so she could humiliate me quietly. She had no idea that from that seat I'd be watching everything unravel up close. And this time I wouldn't be the one ashamed. By the time the rehearsal dinner came around, I was done pretending everything was fine. Laura's research and Jack's findings had confirmed what my gut already knew. Emily's family was nothing more than a cast of paid performers. But knowing and proving are two different things. And that night, I planned to collect my own proof. The dinner was held at Desert Ridge Country Club, a place that screamed wealth. Crystal chandeliers, white roses, waiters in tailored vests. Everything looked picture-perfect, exactly the kind of place where lies like to hide. I parked my truck outside for a long time before going in, staring through the glass windows at people sipping champagne and laughing as if life were effortless. Somewhere among them was a woman who'd spent months building an illusion. When I finally walked in, heads turned the way they always do when someone doesn't quite fit the scene. My suit was clean but simple. My shoes had walked through construction sites, not cocktail parties. I could almost hear Emily's voice in my head, table 12, near the service entrance. I smiled to myself. Fine. Let's see how perfect this family really is. The first person I approached was the man playing her father, tall, silver-haired, a handshake, firm enough to be practiced. "You must be Richard," I said. "Ethan's told me a lot about you. Real estate, right? California markets?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, that's correct. Mostly Northern California." "Oh, that's interesting," I said. "I've done some partnerships with developers out that way." "What's your company called again?" He blinked once, just a second too long. "Hartwell Properties. Boutique firm." I nodded, as if impressed, though the name meant nothing to me. 23 years in business, right? He hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Exactly. That kind of confidence only sounds right when it's true." His didn't. I moved on to Emily's mother, an elegant woman wearing what she clearly hoped looked like old money. Her jewelry was stunning, too stunning, in fact. I recognized the necklace immediately. Tiffany's Celeste collection, one of their newest pieces. Maria, my late wife, had owned something similar. "Beautiful piece," I said, motioning to it. "That's been in your family for generations, right?" She smiled tightly. "Yes, it's very special, European origin." I leaned in just enough to catch the tiny hallmark near the clasp. "Interesting. Looks like Tiffany to me. My wife used to collect their pieces." Her smile froze. "Oh, you might be right. I forget sometimes." Of course she did. Every conversation that night was like that. A test, a tug at the seams of a story that was never real. One of the uncles claimed to be a wine collector, but mispronounced Bordeaux. The aunt boasted about summers in the Hamptons, but couldn't name a single town there. The cousin talked about her time at Yale, but didn't know what a residential college was. It was almost painful to watch. If this were a stage play, the audience would have walked out by now. Eventually, Emily noticed me mingling with her so-called family. She came over her smile, tight voice low. "Why are you interrogating everyone, David? I'm just getting to know the people my son's marrying into," I said, keeping my tone even. She crossed her arms. "You're being suspicious. You've been looking for problems since day one." I looked her straight in the eye. "I don't have to look very hard, Emily. They're right in front of me." Her face turned red. The room had gone quieter without meaning to. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she snapped. "Better," I said softly. "No, just honest." That's when she exploded. "You're jealous. You hate that Ethan finally found someone from a real family. You can't stand that we have class that we didn't have to crawl our way up from nothing like you did." The words hung in the air like a slap. Conversations around us stopped. I saw Ethan turn confusion and embarrassment flooding his face. 12 years ago, I might have yelled back. I might have stormed out, "Let anger win." But recovery teaches you the difference between reacting and responding. So I stayed calm. "Emily," I said quietly, "you're right about one thing. I did have to crawl my way up. And that's exactly why I know what's real and what's fake." She glared at me, trembling, before storming off to the bathroom. Ethan rushed over, whispering sharply, "Dad, what are you doing?" "She's upset." I looked at him, my voice steady. "Son, do you actually know her family? Have you ever been to their home? Met their friends?" He frowned. "They're private people, Dad. Not everyone posts their life online." "There's a difference between private and hidden," I said. He sighed and walked away frustrated. And as he did, I knew that anything I said tonight would only sound like jealousy. Words wouldn't save him. The truth would. When Emily came back, she avoided my eyes the rest of the evening. Her family, if you could call them that, kept glancing at me nervously as if I'd already seen through their masks. And I had. Driving home later, I thought about something my sponsor once told me. You can't expose a lie by shouting at it. You do it by letting it trip over itself. That's exactly what I plan to do. Let the show go on. Let her fake family take their seats. Because by the time the wedding ended, the truth wouldn't just whisper, it would roar. Weddings are supposed to be about joy, about love, promises, and new beginnings. But that night, under the warm glow of chandeliers and the soft hum of violin music, I learned how quickly something beautiful can turn cruel. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Ethan looked nervous but happy, and for a moment I almost believed we might make it through the night without drama. The country club was decorated like a magazine spread white roses, gold-rimmed plates, linen napkins folded into swans. Everyone looked polished, rehearsed, and perfect. Perfect, except for the pit in my stomach. When the toasts began, I sat quietly at my assigned seat table. 12, tucked away in the back near the service entrance. The irony wasn't lost on me. From there, I could see everything. The bride glowing in her dress, my son beaming beside her, and a family that wasn't real smiling like they'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Emily's father spoke first. His voice carried the polished rhythm of a man who had read his lines one too many times. "Our family has always valued integrity, hard work, and respect," he said. People clapped politely. I could almost hear the script pages turning in his head. Then Emily stood up. She looked radiant and confident. Glass of champagne in hand, the center of attention. Her smile was flawless, but her eyes, those eyes had that same cold glint I saw the first night we met. "Thank you all for being here," she began sweetly. "Tonight isn't just about two people joining their lives. It's about two families coming together." Her gaze drifted across the crowd before locking onto me. "Of course," she said, "not all families are the same. Some have histories they're proud of. Others have complications they'd rather forget." A murmur rippled through the guests. I felt every eye turn in my direction. Ethan shifted uneasily beside her. She continued, her tone sharp, but disguised as charm. "My husband's father has had challenges in the past. Addiction, specifically. But we believe in second chances, don't we?" The room fell silent. Even the band stopped tuning. It was the kind of silence that burns, the kind that exposes everything you've ever worked to overcome. She wasn't finished. "We don't judge people for their mistakes," she said, pausing just long enough to make sure everyone knew she was doing exactly that. "But some of us are raised with certain standards, certain expectations about the people we allow into our lives." Ethan reached for her arm, whispering something, but she shook him off and kept going. "My family has always valued education class and stability. We built our legacy through generations of hard work and ethics. We never had to claw our way up from rock bottom because, thankfully, we never fell there." It was a dagger wrapped in politeness, the kind of cruelty that wears a smile. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The guests sat frozen, unsure whether to look at her or me. A few avoided eye contact altogether, as if my shame might be contagious. My son's face turned red. "Emily," he said quietly enough. But she didn't stop. "We're a forgiving family," she said, raising her glass. "And while we welcome everyone tonight, I think it's fair to remember that respect must go both ways. Some people should simply be grateful to be invited into civilized society." She smiled then, a triumphant, cold smile, as half the room lifted their glasses, unsure what else to do. That was it. The moment my years of restraint, recovery, and dignity collided with raw humiliation. I had spent over a decade rebuilding myself, learning that my past didn't define me, and in 5 minutes she tried to turn it into a weapon. But shame only has power when you let it. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, cutting through the silence. Emily froze mid-toast, her confidence faltering for the first time. That was quite a speech. I said, my voice calm but carrying across the room, very revealing. The crowd turned toward me. Somewhere near the front, I saw Laura watching from the side entrance, holding a folder. She gave me a subtle nod. Emily frowned. "David, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I said. I walked toward the head table, steady and deliberate. "Since we're celebrating family tonight, maybe we should make sure everyone here knows who's really sitting at this table." Her fake father shifted in his seat. Her mother looked down, fiddling with her napkin. The air grew heavy, like the moment before a storm. Emily's confidence wavered. "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed. I smiled slightly. "Maybe. But at least I'm being myself." That was the point where everything began to unravel, not just her story, but the illusion she'd spent months perfecting. Because if she thought I'd sit quietly at table 12 and swallow my shame, she didn't understand recovery at all. Recovery doesn't teach you to hide. It teaches you to stand up even when your legs shake. And that night I was done shaking. When I stood up from table 12, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was already quiet, holding its breath after Emily's toast. What came next wasn't anger, it was clarity. Since we're celebrating family tonight, I began, maybe it's time we take a closer look at who's actually sitting at this table. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's face tightened. Her so-called parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. From the corner of the room, I saw Dr. Laura Bennett enter, calm and composed, a manila folder in her hands. "Laura," I said, motioning her forward. "Would you mind joining us? I think the guests might appreciate some context." Emily tried to intervene. "This is ridiculous, David. You're embarrassing yourself." I turned to her gently. "If that's true, then you have nothing to worry about." Laura stepped up beside me. She looked out over the 150 guests and spoke with the calm authority that comes from years of delivering difficult truths. "My name is Dr. Laura Bennett. I'm David's colleague and business partner at New Horizons Recovery Centers. 3 weeks ago, David asked me to verify some details about the Hartley family. Given what we've discovered, I believe transparency is necessary tonight. Emily's father, if that's what he was, stood halfway up. Excuse me, this is outrageous." Laura met his eyes. "Then you won't mind if we start with your resume, Mr. Patterson." The room went silent again. She opened the folder and held up a glossy headshot. "This man is not Richard Hartley, real estate mogul from California. His name is Robert Patterson, a character actor from Los Angeles. He's represented by Prestige Acting Solutions. He specializes in distinguished gentleman roles for corporate videos and dinner theater. Here's his portfolio." The photo matched perfectly. Murmurs broke out across the tables. Laura turned to the elegant woman beside him. "And this isn't Margaret Hartley. This is Linda Foster, also represented by Prestige. She's played socialites, philanthropists, and, fittingly, wedding guests." Linda's hand trembled. Her necklace, Tiffany's Not Vintage, glittered under the lights. Emily stood frozen, her glass shaking in her hand. "This is insane. You're making a scene over nothing." I looked at her calmly. "Then explain the $75,000 payment made from S. Morrison Financial Services to Prestige Acting Solutions last month. The same S. Morrison account that traces back to your personal banking records." The room erupted into whispers. Guests were checking their phones, searching the names Laura mentioned. The actors, because that's what they were, looked pale and cornered. Laura continued reading from another document. "Each family member here was paid $1,500 per day for 3 months of preparation. They were instructed to portray an old-money real estate family from California, to avoid specific business questions, and to redirect conversations to topics like wine travel and education." One of the uncles stood up suddenly. "I don't have to listen to this," he said, bolting for the exit. The cousin and aunt followed right behind him. Guests gasped. A few laughed nervously, unsure what to believe. Emily's voice broke. "You don't understand. I just wanted everything to be perfect." That's when Jack Turner, the private investigator, walked in. He didn't need an introduction. His presence alone changed the energy in the room. "I think we should add something else," he said, holding his own folder. While looking into the financial trail, I found medical records tied to Ms. Morrison, also known as Emily. 4 different doctors, 7 pharmacies, dozens of prescriptions filled under overlapping dates. OxyContin, Percocet, Adderall. A heavy silence fell over the room. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant clink of silverware from the kitchen. Jack looked directly at her. That's prescription fraud. Class 4 felony under Arizona law. The state board has already flagged your name. Investigators will likely be contacting you within 48 hours. Emily's face went white. The champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. My son Ethan stared at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "Emily, is this true?" he whispered. She couldn't answer. She just cried, silently, mascara streaking down her face. I took a step closer, speaking softly, so only she could hear. "You called me damaged for being an addict in recovery. But at least I faced my truth. You built your life out of lies." Ethan stood up, removed his wedding ring, and set it on the table beside the spilled champagne. "The wedding's over," he said, quietly. "I'm done." Half the guests were on their feet now, stunned, recording, whispering. The rest sat frozen, unsure whether to stay or leave. Dr. Laura placed her folder down gently. "Emily, if you want help, I can arrange it tonight. There's still time to change your story." But Emily shook her head, tears falling. "You ruined everything," she said to me. "You destroyed my life." I looked at her, feeling neither victory nor anger, just a deep, tired kind of sadness. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself. I just stopped you before you took my son down with you." The parents slipped out the side door. The crowd began to disperse. The band stopped playing. All that was left was the wreckage of a fantasy, and the truth, raw and unfiltered, laid bare for everyone to see. That night wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, about showing that no amount of shame, lies, or manipulation can silence the truth forever. Because when you've spent 12 years rebuilding your life, you learn one thing above all else. People can fake everything: status, wealth, family. But they can't fake integrity. The moment Jack finished speaking, everything unraveled at once. The illusion that had held this entire evening together shattered like the champagne glass at Emily's feet. People started whispering, phones came out, and cameras flashed. Emily stood frozen, pale, as her wedding dress trembling, as though the truth itself had weight. I could see her pulse racing at her neck, the realization sinking in that this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a full-blown scandal. And then, as if to confirm it all, her purse slipped from the head table. Dozens of pills spilled across the white linen OxyContin, Percocet, Adderall. The same names Jack had listed only minutes before. They rolled toward the edge of the table, glittering under the chandelier. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the crowd. Ethan stared at the pills like he couldn't process what he was seeing. His voice was barely a whisper. "You brought drugs to our wedding." Emily's lip quivered. "I needed them," she said, her words shaky. "The stress, the planning, everything. It's been too much." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so it only reached her. "You don't need excuses, Emily. You need help. There's a difference." She turned on me, eyes wild. "This is your fault. If you'd just stayed out of it." "No," I said quietly. "If I'd stayed out of it, my son would have married someone who built her life on lies." Ethan took off his wedding ring, his hands trembling. "The wedding's over," he said, simply setting it beside the scattered pills. I'm done pretending." The words hit harder than any shout could. Guests started standing up, some in disbelief, others in pity. A few were filming, because in the age of social media, even tragedy becomes content. Emily tried to gather the pills with shaking hands, mumbling something about fixing everything. But the more she tried to hold her world together, the more it crumbled. Laura stepped forward gently. "Emily, this isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about treatment. You can get help. Tonight, if you're willing." "I'm not going anywhere," Emily cried. "This is my wedding." Ethan stepped back, his voice calm but broken. "No, it was supposed to be our wedding. Now it's just the day I found out who you really are." She tried to reach for him, but he walked away. He didn't look back. Then Jack spoke again, his tone matter-of-fact. "The state board's been tracking her prescriptions for months. The FBI has already been alerted about the shell company and financial fraud. This isn't just addiction anymore. It's criminal." A chill ran through the room. Guests stopped whispering. Even the band, still holding their instruments, stayed frozen. Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing, muttering that none of this was fair. But fair doesn't mean easy. Fair means facing what you've done. And for once, she couldn't lie her way out. Laura crouched beside her. "You can still choose how this story ends," she said softly. "You can keep running, or you can get help." Emily didn't answer. She just cried harder, clutching her purse like it could protect her from the truth spilling out of it. As the police arrived, quietly escorted by venue staff, Ethan stood beside me. He didn't say much, but when our eyes met, I saw something shift. The fog of denial was gone. What remained was grief and clarity. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said finally. "You tried to warn me. You don't have to be sorry for loving someone," I told him. "But you do need to learn when to stop letting love blind you." He nodded, tears welling up, and I put a hand on his shoulder. Around us, guests were leaving in stunned silence. The wedding that was supposed to mark a beginning had become the end of a deception. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the parking lot in blue and red, like a distorted reflection of the celebration that should have been. I watched as Emily was led away, still crying her perfect dress, now wrinkled and stained. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's just the quiet relief of knowing the truth is finally out. That night, as I drove home, I realized something that would stay with me forever. You can't save someone who's determined to live a lie, but you can save yourself and the people you love from being dragged into it. And in that truth, I finally felt peace. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Someone at the wedding had recorded everything from Emily's cruel speech to the moment the pills spilled across the table, and by sunrise, the video had already gone viral. The headline, flashing across my phone, read, "Recovery Center Owner Exposes Fake Wedding and Prescription Fraud." I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hands, trying to process how a family disaster had turned into a national headline. For a long time, I didn't know whether to feel proud or humiliated. But then the messages started coming in. The first call was from a local journalist who wanted to shed light on addiction stigma. The second was from a man I'd never met. He said his daughter was in recovery and that watching me stand up for myself gave him the courage to stop hiding her story. Then came the emails. Hundreds of them. People from all over the country wrote to say thank you. A mother from Ohio told me her son had just checked into rehab, but she'd been too ashamed to tell her friends. After seeing the story, she decided to speak openly for the first time. A young woman from Texas wrote that she'd been clean for 3 months, but was terrified to go to her cousin's wedding because her family still treated her like she was broken. Watching you take that microphone, she said, reminded me that recovery isn't weakness. It's proof of strength. I read every message. Some made me laugh. Some made me cry. But every one of them reminded me that something good had come out of the wreckage. Within a week, the video had millions of views. The tabloids focused on the drama, the fake family, the FBI involvement, but people in the recovery community saw something else, a moment when shame lost its power. Dr. Laura called me one afternoon, her voice bright with both exhaustion and pride. You realize what you've started, right? 3 of our clients came forward this week to share their stories publicly. You've made it safer for people to be honest. That hit me hard. I'd spent years teaching others that recovery was about action, about showing up even when it hurts. But I'd never imagined that standing up for myself at a wedding could turn into a lesson for thousands of others. Soon, I was invited to speak at local community forums, treatment centers, and even churches. Everywhere I went, people wanted to talk not about Emily or her lies, but about how families deal with shame, how silence keeps people sick, how dignity can't exist without truth. One night, after giving a talk at a high school, a young man approached me. He was nervous, fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I saw your video online. My girlfriend's parents don't want her dating me because I'm in recovery. But when you said that recovery isn't something to hide, I decided I'm done apologizing for trying to get better." I shook his hand and told him the truth. You don't need anyone's permission to change your life. Just keep doing the work. That's when I realized the story had stopped being about me a long time ago. It had become something larger, a conversation about who deserves compassion and who doesn't, about the quiet prejudice that people in recovery face every day, about how one cruel comment can either destroy someone or ignite a movement. Even Ethan started to heal in his own way. He began attending Al-Anon meetings, learning to separate love from enabling. One evening, he told me, "Dad, I used to think recovery meant fixing the past. Now, I know it's about building something real, even after everything breaks." He was right. Recovery isn't about erasing your story. It's about owning it so completely that no one can use it against you again. As for Emily, she eventually entered treatment. The charges against her were serious, but from what I've heard, she's doing the work. And that's all anyone can really do. Start again, one honest step at a time. When I look back now, I don't see that wedding as the night everything fell apart. I see it as the night truth finally won. It reminded me why I started my recovery centers in the first place, to help people reclaim their worth, no matter how far they've fallen. Because in the end, what defines us isn't the mistakes we've made. It's how we rise after them. And if my story taught anyone, even one person, that recovery is something to stand tall for, then every moment of humiliation, every whisper, every headline was worth it. That's what real healing looks like, turning pain into purpose. And that's a story worth sharing. 3 months after that night, life began to feel quiet again, not empty, just still. The noise of gossip, The headlines, the whispers in the recovery community, all of it faded into background hum. What remained were the lessons that only pain can teach. Emily entered treatment not long after the wedding. From what I heard, she finally stopped running from herself. Her real mother even called me once a soft-spoken woman from Ohio, her voice trembling as she thanked me. "We've been trying to help her for years," she said. "Maybe now she'll finally accept that she needs recovery." I didn't know what to say except, "I hope she does." Because the truth is, you can't hate someone who is drowning in the same storm you once barely survived. You just hope they find their way to shore. Ethan took time off work and started going to Al-Anon meetings. At first he went because I asked him to, but eventually he went because he wanted to understand. One evening he came by my office at the recovery center. He looked different, lighter, somehow clearer. "Dad," he said, "I finally get it. Recovery isn't about fixing broken people. It's about learning how to stop pretending you're not broken." That line stayed with me. We talked for hours that night about mistakes, forgiveness, and how easy it is to confuse love with rescue. He admitted that he'd ignored the red flags with Emily because he wanted so badly to believe in her the same way I once wanted others to believe in me. And I told him that what matters most isn't who fails you, but how you respond when they do. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Emily. She wrote from treatment, her words shaky but honest. She apologized for everything, the lies, the cruelty, the humiliation. She said she was finally facing the truth she'd buried for years. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was angry. Part of me was sad. But a bigger part of me, maybe the part that's been sober for 12 years, just felt compassion. Because recovery teaches you that healing isn't about who hurt you. It's about choosing peace over bitterness. By then, the story of the fake wedding had faded from headlines, but the impact stayed. My centers were busier than ever, not because of the scandal, but because people saw something different in our message now. We didn't just teach sobriety, we taught dignity. That became my new definition of recovery. It's not just about not using. It's about refusing to accept less than you deserve. It's about setting boundaries, speaking truth, and holding your head high, even when others try to drag your past into the present. One afternoon, after a group session, one of my younger clients said, "Mr. Miller, how do you deal with people who still judge you?" I smiled and told him, "You stop trying to change their minds. You just live in a way that makes their judgment irrelevant." That's the real freedom recovery gives you. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. Sometimes I still think about that wedding night. The music, the silence after Emily's toast, the pills scattering like symbols of everything broken in her life. It used to make me angry. Now, it just reminds me how far I've come. We all fall. We all have chapters we don't want others to read. But what matters isn't the fall, it's the rewrite. If you're watching this, and you're struggling with your past, I want you to hear this clearly. Your history is not your identity. Your mistakes are not your worth. And your recovery, whatever that looks like, is proof that you're still becoming who you were meant to be. Because healing isn't about forgetting where you've been. It's about learning to stand tall when people try to remind you. And if I've learned anything after 12 years sober, it's this: don't let anyone make you feel ashamed for surviving. You didn't just get clean. You got free.